God exists throughout the physical world, but he is not limited to the physical world. And the physical world is, from my understanding, his creation. And just as I can with my videos, so to speak, like take a section that I said in the middle and then cut it out and add it to the beginning. Or one of the big questions that people have is, Cain had a wife. How did that happen? Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name is Simon Williams, and today we're going to be answering a question from one of our Patreon supporters. Yeah, we have those. The reason for this is because this is one of the questions that was brought up during the Scopes monkey trial. For those of you who don't know, the Scopes monkey trial was a prosecution against a school teacher in Tennessee in 1925 who was found out to be teaching evolution, which was against a recent bill that was passed at the time. One of the key exchanges in this trial was between Clarence Darrow, the defense attorney, and Williams Jennings Bryan, who was a counsel for the prosecution. In that exchange, Darrow asked Bryan, where did Cain get his wife? To which Bryan replied that he would leave the agnostics to hunt for her. And initially this response by Bryan resonated with me. To me, it doesn't seem like this question is particularly important, but I know that it is important to some people, so that's why we're going to go into it. One of the first questions that we need to see if we can answer is, what is the name of Cain's wife? Like, who is she? And there are a lot of different sources out there, or resources out there, that give you a variety of names. And I don't know which, if any of those names are reliable or trustworthy, but here they are. And that's about it on that. But the more important question is probably, where did she come from? We're first going to go into the traditional response to this question, and that has to do with the fact that we're taking the Genesis account literally, and humanity started off with two people, Adam and Eve. So we know from the Bible that Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel. And then when Cain killed Abel, they had another son called Seth. And people will read those verses and be like, hey, I don't see any girls here. There's just three boys. But all you have to do in order to get a better understanding of what's going on here is to go and keep reading. You just keep reading the book of Genesis, and eventually you get to chapter 5, verse 4, when it'll say that Adam lived a number of years and he had sons and daughters. So Adam lived a long time, and throughout that period, some people have calculated that Adam could have had as many as 50 kids. And so basically the answer to this is that Cain married his sister. Some other people will also say that it's even possible that Cain married one of his nieces. But then some people will be like, hey, I thought that God wasn't okay with people marrying their sisters. And you're right. In Leviticus 18, God provides a series of laws against people having sexual relations with to varying degrees and varying places. And in this chapter, God says that you're not supposed to have sexual relations with your father's daughter, and no matter what, if she was born in your household or abroad. And people will say, well, okay, so that's contradictory. We have to understand that from this perspective and this answer that we're given is that this law was given after the Exodus. And the Exodus, the Bible seems to indicate, happened over 2,000 years after Adam appeared on the scene. What people will say, and what apologists say, is that over those 2,000 years, the human species is becoming more and more, the gene pool is becoming more and more corrupted because of the fallen world. Because sin has come into the world and it's continuing to corrupt the nations. So to say that it was fine to marry your sister back then because, you know, like the corruption hadn't spread so much as to create defects. But nowadays it's definitely frowned upon to marry your sister. In fact, illegal in plenty of states because of the fact that you're probably going to get genetic defects. But while doing some research into this, I did run across a article saying that you do happen to increase the chances of producing really excellent trait combinations. So, but the odds of producing undesirable trait combinations are much, much more likely. You never hear anybody saying, don't marry your first cousin because you're gonna end up producing a genius. Nobody says that. But basically that's the first answer to that question. Cain married his sister, and it was perfectly fine because sin hadn't corrupted the gene pool enough at that point in order for it to be dangerous. You see it in Genesis 5:4 that Adam had sons and daughters, so that's just the answer to that. Cain either married his sister or his niece, and there was nothing wrong with it because of the lack of corruption. It should be noted here that that's not the only explanation available to the Christian. There are people out there that believe that Cain's wife is an indication that there were people outside of the garden. That Adam and Eve were the first humans to bear the image of God, but they weren't the only humans around. Now, it should be noted that most Christians that answer this question kind of see this as not orthodox or not a viable option, but and they also think that it's a foolish way to go about answering the question because of the biblical data. But we're not living in a world in which we are limited to what the Bible says on the creation account. We're also living in a world in which we do have a fossil record, and also we're able to analyze the world and come to conclusions based off of that. And when we analyze the world, we do seem to be interacting with a world that seems to be very old. When you read the Bible account, you can get the impression that the world is only like 6,000 years old or 5,000 years old. But when we look at the fossil record, scientists tend to believe that the Earth is billions of years old, and that life has been around for almost all of it, you know, and for billions of years prior to that, and life that we could recognize as life as we know it has been around for millions of years. So what do we make of that? How do we reconcile the biblical account with, because not only is it the case that we're trying to understand the biblical account with science and what science has said about the origin of species and all that stuff, but also Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 have a really hard time coming together neatly. And there's a couple ways in which people go about answering this kind of question, trying to reconcile this. But what I want to emphasize first is that what we need to do is read Genesis 1, read Genesis 2, and we need to come to an appreciation of the differences presented in those accounts. We need to remember that the Bible is not a scientific textbook, so that means that we don't need to interpret it literally through our Western eyes. Our Western, highly scientific and analytical eyes. But there's a lot of debate on these matters, and I'm personally not dogmatic about anything one way or another. I have a view of God that is, and the creation account that's very different than some people. I have a understanding that the physical world is not nearly as closed as some people would like to believe that it is, and that it is subject to change at God's discretion. It could very easily be the case that God actualized the world in accordance with a literal interpretation of Genesis 1 and then completely modified it after the fall. And the reasoning for why he would do that is completely up to him. Whether he wanted it that way or not doesn't matter to me. And there's absolutely no way for us to know one way or another. We are within the physical world. So everything that we observe is what is observable within the physical world. But God is outside of the physical world. He is perfectly... God exists throughout the physical world, but he is not limited to the physical world. And the physical world is, from my understanding, his creation. And just as I can with my videos, so to speak, like take a section that I said in the middle and then cut it out and add it to the beginning, or take a file that's separate and add it to the beginning of this video or to the end of it. God can do that kind of stuff with our reality, and we would never ever be able to know one way or another. You know, we could never know if God didn't want us to know. So it could be the case that God did create the universe in accordance with the literal interpretation in Genesis 1 and just backfilled everything else later on. That's open for discussion too. These kind of questions are just fringe questions from my perspective. They don't really bear much weight. They're very interesting to speculate on, like how does God interact with the universe in order to produce creation one way or another, and that's very interesting to meditate on. But we are so limited and so finite in our ability to detect things that we kind of just have to trust God on what He says. And so, could Genesis be taken literally? Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 be taken literally? Yeah, they could. Could they just be allegorical? Yeah, they could just be allegorical. Could they? Could evolution be true and the Bible true at the same time? Yes, they could. Christians, from my perspective, are not limited in any way as the naturalist is or some other people are. We worship a God who has complete control over this, just like an author has complete control over their book. And there's nothing we can do about it. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd really like to hear what you have to say on the matter. We can go into more detail about God and time if you want, and talk about creation some more. So let me know what you think. Love to hear it. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and give us a like, and also subscribe if you want to have more discussions like this. And or if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a question below in the comment section. Please subscribe, and visit us at www.nechristianapologetics.com, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, and God bless.